There's a pattern in history that ends the same way every single time. Three countries, three collapses, one identical mistake. Repeated across generations. Each believed they were smarter, more advanced, immune. Each watched their currency burn to ash anyway. Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela. Three economies, completely different worlds, all followed the same script, line by line, until money itself stopped working. And here's the part no one wants to say out loud. We are following that exact same pattern right now. The same government logic, the same temporary fixes, the same math that never lies. For over a century, nations have tried to cheat economic gravity, and every single one failed the same way, by printing their way out of crisis until their money died. It starts slowly. A crisis hits. A government panics. They print. Just a little. It's temporary. Then a little more. Then more. Until the bills mean nothing and the middle class disappears. And today, in 2025, the largest economies on earth are running the same playbook, only faster, and on a scale the world has never seen before. This is the story of the most destructive pattern in economic history, how it happens, why no one ever stops it, and why, according to the math, we might be next. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment below. It helps this story reach more people who care about truth. The year was 1923, and Germany was collapsing from the inside out. But the destruction didn't start with bombs or armies. It started with a printing press. After World War I, Germany owed the world everything. The Treaty of Versailles demanded 132 billion gold marks in reparations, roughly 50,000 tons of gold. That's about $1.4 trillion in today's money. But Germany didn't have it. Its economy was shattered. Factories were silent. Tax revenue had dried up. So the government made a choice. The same choice every collapsing empire eventually makes. Print money to solve problems that money printing can't solve. At first, it looked manageable. The Reichsbank began quietly expanding the money supply. A few billion marks here, a few billion there. Prices rose, but life continued. Officials promised it was temporary, a necessary bridge to recovery. They said, trust the process. By 1921, $1 cost 60 marks. By 1922, it was 7,400. Still, the government insisted everything was under control. Then came the moment of no return. France occupied the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland, demanding payment. Workers went on strike. Factories stopped. The government responded by paying the striking workers with freshly printed money. The spiral began. January 19, 2023, 17,000 marks to the dollar. July, 350,000. August, 4.6 million. October, 25 billion. By November, 4.2 trillion marks to $1. To buy a loaf of bread, you needed a stack of cash higher than the bread itself. Workers were paid twice a day, sprinting to spend their wages before they lost value by dinner. Restaurants changed prices mid-meal. Children played with bricks of banknotes. And in one of the darkest ironies of history, people burned money in their fireplaces because it was cheaper than buying wood. This was what money death looked like. Every hour, prices doubled. Every day, savings evaporated. 30 years of work gone in 30 days. The middle class, the backbone of the nation, was obliterated. Retirees, pensioners, teachers, small business owners, anyone holding marks lost everything. Crime exploded. Prostitution, black markets, and political violence became daily life. Faith in government disintegrated. People stopped trusting banks, newspapers, and eventually each other. And out of that chaos came something far more dangerous than inflation: rage. A sense of betrayal, of injustice. Germany's democracy cracked. Radical voices found an audience. Within a decade, that chaos birthed one of the darkest regimes in history. But it all started here, not with ideology or war, but with the quiet hum of printing presses in 1919. Because hyperinflation doesn't just destroy currency, it destroys trust. And once a society loses trust in its money, it loses trust in everything. By the end of 1923, the mark was gone. Germany introduced a new currency, the Rentenmark, backed by land and industry, trying to rebuild faith. But the scars ran deep. People no longer believed in promises, only in hard assets, gold or foreign currency. The nightmare ended only after the old currency had completely died. It wasn't controlled, it wasn't managed, it burned itself out. And here's the terrifying part. Every major hyperinflation since then has followed the exact same script. A government in crisis, a decision to print, a promise it's temporary, and a spiral that no one can stop. What happened in Weimar wasn't a one-time disaster. It became the blueprint, the template every future collapse would unknowingly copy. Because just 80 years later, halfway across the world, another country would repeat the pattern almost step by step, and the numbers would be even worse. Keep watching, because what happened next would make even empires tremble. Fast forward 8 decades, a new century, a new continent, and the exact same mistake. This time, it wasn't Europe, it was Africa. Zimbabwe, once known as the breadbasket of Africa. Rich farmland, stable infrastructure, a literate population, and an economy that fed half the continent. It had everything Germany didn't. And yet, within 10 years, it would collapse even faster. The story began in the year 2000. President Robert Mugabe launched what he called land reform, the seizure of white-owned farms for redistribution. It sounded righteous, but overnight, Zimbabwe's agricultural backbone snapped. Farms stopped producing. Exports vanished. The economy shrank. Tax revenue plummeted. And just like Weimar Germany, the government faced a choice: cut spending and face unrest, or print money to paper over the problem. They printed. By 2003, inflation hit 600%. The government promised it was temporary. They blamed sanctions, hoarders, and foreign conspiracies, anyone but themselves. They called it economic empowerment, but the only thing empowered was the printing press. By 2006, inflation reached 1,000%. The Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe started printing at night to keep up with its own chaos. Government workers were paid with brand new notes that lost value before they could even buy lunch. Then came 2007. The year inflation broke all human comprehension. 11,000%. 50,000%. 100,000%. Stores stopped changing price tags. They just charged in US dollars, if you had any. Factories shut down. Supermarket shelves went bare. Doctors fled the country. Teachers quit. And the government responded the only way it knew how, by printing even more. Price controls came next. Businesses were forced to sell at approved prices, far below their costs, so they simply stopped selling. And when the shelves went empty, the government blamed them for economic sabotage. By 2008, hyperinflation had become a joke and a nightmare. The numbers stopped making sense. Economists couldn't even measure it anymore. Unofficially, it hit 89.7 sextillion% per year. That's an 8, a 9, and 21 zeros. Prices doubled every 24 hours. A Coke that cost 1 Zimbabwe dollar on Monday cost 2 on Tuesday, 4 on Wednesday, 8 on Thursday, 128 by the next Monday. The government printed a $100 trillion note, the highest denomination ever issued by any central bank in history. It couldn't buy you a bus ticket. People carried backpacks full of cash to buy a loaf of bread. Children play with the stacks of money as toys. Salaries became meaningless. No one could spend fast enough to stay alive. One man famously said, "I used to be a millionaire. Now I can't afford an egg." In less than a decade, Zimbabwe went from prosperity to starvation. Hospitals ran out of basic supplies. Teachers became traders, and the average citizen lost 24 pounds because they couldn't afford food. Unemployment hit 94%. The economy shrank by half. Life expectancy fell from 60 to 34 years. By 2009, the government gave up. They officially abandoned their own currency and adopted foreign ones, the US dollar, the South African brand. The Zimbabwe dollar, once stronger than the American dollar, ceased to exist. And here's the chilling truth. None of it was unpredictable. None of it was unique. They followed the same exact script Germany had written 80 years earlier. Crisis, printing, excuses, collapse. Every stage the same, only faster this time. But perhaps the most painful irony of all was this. Zimbabwe's leaders believed they were different, that they were smarter, that their situation was special. They weren't, because hyperinflation doesn't care about ideology. It doesn't care about race, geography, or intention. It's math, and math doesn't negotiate. When too much money chases too few goods, value dies. Every time, everywhere. And so, history repeated itself. A government printing its way to oblivion, dragging its people with it. But the pattern didn't stop in Africa. Barely a decade later, it crossed the Atlantic to a country with oil wealth beyond imagination, the richest nation in South America. And there, the same story began again. Same playbook, same excuses. Only this time, it would play out on a scale that would shock the world. Because what happened in Venezuela made even Zimbabwe look stable. But the most shocking part hasn't happened yet. If you want to see what the end of an economy looks like, not in theory, but in real time, look at Venezuela. It had everything a modern nation could dream of: oil reserves larger than Saudi Arabia, a booming middle class, free education, free healthcare, and one of the highest standards of living in Latin America. In 2001, Venezuela was richer per person than Brazil, Mexico, and almost every country south of the US border. But like every empire before it, it made the same fatal assumption: we can spend more than we earn, forever. It started slowly. Under Hugo Chavez, the government expanded social programs, free homes, food subsidies, jobs for everyone. It was a political miracle. Poverty dropped, approval ratings soared. But behind the celebration, the math was falling apart. The programs were funded not by production, but by oil revenue. And when oil prices fell in 2014, the entire illusion collapsed.
Correo irrecutable de gobernante de la SEMA Tool Weimar que Zimbabwe de uso. The Printing Press. The Central Bank, Banco Central de Venezuela, began creating money at an exponential rate. Between 2012 and 2017, the money supply exploded by 14,000%. That's not a typo, 14,000%. By 2016, inflation hit 800%, then 2,600%, then 1.3 million%. And at its peak, by 2018, some estimates placed it at 10 million%. That means if a carton of eggs cost 200 bolivars in January, it cost 200 million by December. Citizens stopped counting zeros. Shops stopped printing price tags. Cash became useless. People paid for groceries with gold flakes, cigarettes, or dollars. When your own currency becomes trash, anything else becomes money. The government responded the only way every collapsing regime does, by pretending it wasn't happening. They blamed economic warfare, hoarders, and foreign sabotage. They issued new currencies, lopped up zeros, and called it a reset. In 2018, they introduced the sovereign bolivar. It failed in months. In 2021, they removed 6 more zeros and tried again. It failed again. Doctors left their hospitals to sell goods on the street. Teachers became sex workers. Lawyers, engineers, professionals all fled the country or starved. Hospitals ran out of gloves and antibiotics. The national power grid collapsed weekly. The average Venezuelan lost 24 pounds due to malnutrition. 5 million people, nearly 7% of the population, fled their homeland, turning into refugees in neighboring countries. By 2019, Venezuela's economy had shrunk by 75%. That's worse than the Great Depression, worse than Germany after World War II. And all of it, every moment, was fueled by the same cycle that had already destroyed nations before. 1. A crisis. 2. Printing money to fix it. 3. The illusion of control. 4. Collapse. Venezuela's leaders believed they were different. They had oil, they said. They could print their way through it. But you can't print food. You can't print trust. You can't print wealth. Hyperinflation doesn't care how much oil you have. It only cares about math. And the math always wins. By the end of the decade, Venezuela had effectively dollarized. Most transactions happen in US dollars, not bolivars. The national currency still exists on paper, but in reality, it's dead. And the story didn't end there, because for every country that collapses, another believes it's immune. Every leader thinks they found a way to outsmart gravity. But when you zoom out, Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, you see the same pattern repeating like clockwork. Different languages, different ideologies, different excuses, same beginning, same ending. And that brings us to today, to the modern world, where central banks and superpowers are running the same experiment on a global scale. The numbers are bigger, the printing is digital, and the stakes are existential. Because what's happening now isn't new, it's the final chapter written all over again. But the most shocking part hasn't happened yet. If history is a mirror, then what we are seeing today is the reflection no one wants to admit. Because the same pattern that destroyed Germany, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela is now unfolding across the developed world, only bigger, faster, and invisible. This time, the printing press doesn't use ink. It's digital. A few keystrokes, and trillions appear. In March 2020, as the world went into lockdown, governments faced the same crisis every collapsing empire faces: a sudden economic stop, collapsing revenues, and a terrified population demanding rescue. And just like every government before them, they found the same solution: print money. The United States alone created more dollars in the span of 24 months than in the first 2 centuries of its existence. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet exploded from $4 trillion to $9 trillion. Congress spent $5 trillion in emergency stimulus, money created from nothing, injected directly into the economy. Europe, Japan, China all followed. By 2022, over $20 trillion in new money had been created globally. For a while, it felt like a miracle. Markets recovered, stocks soared, crypto went parabolic, home prices broke records. People called it the everything rally. But if you've studied history, you know what comes next. Printing money doesn't create wealth, it only shifts it. It makes those with assets richer and everyone else poorer. By 2022, inflation hit 9.1% in the United States, the highest in 40 years. Europe followed. The UK crossed double digits. Governments blamed supply chains, energy shocks, wars, and corporate greed. But none of that printed trillions of dollars. Even now, they insist it's under control. But the signs are the same ones that appeared before every collapse: massive money supply expansion. The US M2 supply rose 40% in 2 years, unprecedented outside of wartime. Government debt beyond reason. Japan's debt stands at 264% of GDP, America's at 130%, and growing by $1 trillion every 100 days. Inflation that never truly disappears. Even as official numbers fall, real prices, food, housing, insurance keep climbing. Governments change how inflation is measured, hiding the pain with adjustments and substitutions. Asset bubbles everywhere. Stocks near record highs. Real estate unaffordable. Wages stagnant. And faith in currency, the foundation of everything, is fracturing. Gold at all-time highs. Bitcoin born out of distrust for central banks. Countries forming new trade blocs to escape the dollar. The pattern is here. The same justifications, the same arrogance, the same "this time is different." But there's one critical difference. In the past, these collapses were local. A single country burned while the rest watched. This time, the system is global, and everyone is playing the same game. Central banks can't stop printing without crashing their own markets. Governments can't cut spending without triggering unrest. And inflation isn't a glitch anymore. It's a feature holding everything together. It's not just about economics anymore. It's about psychology, faith, because modern money only works as long as people believe it will still buy something tomorrow. Once that belief cracks, it spreads faster than any virus, and when it goes all at once. We like to believe we're smarter than history, that algorithms, AI, and economists will save us.
But every empire thought the same thing right before the fall. And here we are, watching the same movie again, frame by frame, the same pattern, the same math, the same ending waiting in the wings. The only question left is, will we stop before it's too late? Or are we already past the point of no return? Because what's happening now isn't new, it's just happening to us. But the most shocking part hasn't happened yet. History doesn't repeat itself perfectly, but it rhymes with terrifying precision. Every generation believes they are living in a new era, immune to all mistakes, and every generation learns the same lesson the hard way. You can't print prosperity. Hyperinflation isn't just an economic failure, it's a moral one. It's what happens when a society chooses comfort over discipline, illusion over truth. When leaders trade responsibility for applause. When citizens demand benefits that can only be paid for with tomorrow's debt. That's the real cost of printing money, not the numbers, the mindset. Because the moment a nation decides it can create value from nothing, it begins to decay from within, not just financially, but spiritually. Hard work stops mattering. Saving becomes pointless. Trust dies. And when trust dies, everything else follows. It's easy to blame politicians or central banks, and yes, they deserve it. But the truth is harder. Every collapse begins with a collective decision to look away, to pretend the rules don't apply this time, to believe it can't happen here. It can. It always can. The real question is whether we'll recognize the pattern before it completes, or whether, like Germany, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela, we'll only understand when it's already too late. Because history doesn't whisper, it screams. And right now, it's screaming again. If this story opened your eyes, don't just scroll away. Subscribe, share, and tell me what lesson you'll never forget. Because history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.